Story 1. I'm the sole survivor of a roller coaster that couldn't be stopped for 12 hours. Last year, I learned a lesson I will never forget. Trust your gut. I had the day off from work. I wanted to do something fun, but everyone I knew was busy. Makes sense. I mean, it was a Tuesday. I decided I'd just go to the amusement park by myself. I've done it before and had a great time. I'm a bit of a thrill seeker. Well, not too much anymore. Going 5 miles over the speed limit is about all the excitement I want out of life anymore. I got to the park at around 2 p.m. It was slow. Even for a Tuesday. It gave me a sense of excitement because I knew I'd be able to ride a lot of rides without having to be there all day. At the same time, it gave me a weird, uncanny feeling. All this space and not enough people to fill it up. I ignored the feeling and moved on. I don't know about you, but whenever I go to an amusement park, I like to work my way up to the really crazy rides. I'll start small and finish off the day with my favorite. My favorite just happened to be called the Grim Reaper. It feels a little too on the nose, doesn't it? It was 7:30 p.m., and the park closed at 8 p.m. And I knew it was time to get in line for my final ride. I also made a new friend while there. We met standing in line at one of my first rides of the day. We decided after chatting the whole time in line that we'd hang out for the rest of the day. His name was Charlie. We agreed on every ride that day. Except for the last. He wanted to end the night on the Mindbinder, but after some convincing, aka, the Mindbinder's line was way shorter while passing by. We decided to do the Grim Reaper last. We got in line for the Grim Reaper, and there was hardly anyone in line. It made sense, given that it was almost closing time. Do you think they will let us ride multiple times if the line stays down? Charlie said with his hands clasped excitedly in front of him. I just smiled at him and chuckled. Normally, I would have been excited too. But something in my gut felt so off. For some reason, I didn't want to go on one of my favorite rides. Maybe it was the 5 corn dogs I ate a couple hours earlier, I figured. I'm a very rational person. I wasn't the kind of person to let anxiety or worry rule over me. I always thought life was just what you made of it. When we got in line, there were about 60 people, give or take. The people in front of us did their ride, and 30 of us were left in line. People started looking at the time and saying they were tired and just getting out of line. By the time it was our turn, only 19 people were in line. I knew the ride well enough to remember that it held 20 people, so if no one else got in line, they really might let us go multiple times. I really didn't want that, though. Honestly, I felt even more compelled to get out of line after all those others did too. And I didn't want to seem lame to my new friend if I wanted to get off the coaster after one ride. The time came for us to get on the ride. My heart was pounding faster than it ever had. I wondered if I was all worked up because I watched Final Destination 3 with a friend a couple weeks back. But I wasn't having visions of the terrible fate we would all face. I was just feeling off. I did everything in my power to get it to all make sense and to not worry, but nothing worked. I seriously considered just telling Charlie I didn't feel great after the last ride, but I finally found someone with my taste in roller coasters. I didn't want to let him down. We were towards the back of the line, so we didn't have much say in where we sat. We ended up in the third car from the front. I was just happy we weren't in the front car. As you get on the Grim Reaper, it plays a cheesy little jingle, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, the Grim Reaper will find you dead or alive. With music in the background that always sounded so dumb in the past. I couldn't believe it was getting to me. Charlie even hummed along to it while grabbing my arm with happiness. We got in our seats, and an employee came by and pulled down the metal bar restraint to secure us in our seats. It was the kind that strapped you individually over your shoulder. I'm on the chubbier side, but I can always fit into coaster seats. I've never been told I couldn't go on a ride. I'm just sometimes a little snug. It's actually kind of nice because I feel very secure. As we got strapped in, I felt the plastic-coated metal hit my shoulders and chest. It should have given me a sense of comfort and safety, but I just felt trapped. The employee walked back to the station that has the infamous big button that starts the ride. He flashed all a thumbs up and yelled, "Ready for the Reaper?" Everyone raised their hands and let out an excited scream. Except for me. I let out a large sigh. Counting down the seconds. Trying to imagine Charlie and I once we were off the ride and how happy we would be. The employee hit the button, and we were off. The coaster shot out of the loading station like we were a bullet being shot out of a gun. After that, it started on a relatively slow ascent up a point to a drop off of 60 degrees, a couple of twists and turns, a big loop, and some more twists and turns. About halfway through the ride, I was enjoying myself. I was thinking about how the hard part was done, and I was safe. Just a little anxiety was all. We were rounding out our last bend when a sense of relief came over me. I could see the end of the ride. I was almost done. But the ride didn't start to slow down. Normally, the coaster starts to slowly come to a full stop several hundred feet from the end, but it was still going. As we passed by the loading area, I saw the operators look confused as we raced by. I noticed no one else was waiting in line. Someone screamed, "One more time!" And everyone on board gave an excited response. Everyone except for me. Charlie looked over at me and grabbed my wrist. Yes. I knew they would let us keep going. This is awesome. He let out an excited yelp as we reached the climb to the drop. He was beaming with joy the whole rest of the lap. We passed by the loading area once again, but this time the coaster operator had a couple other people standing with him. The operator who strapped us looked red and worried. As we were whipped by the employees for our third ride of the day, the other riders were divided. Some were still excited, screaming, "Let's go! One more time!" Or, "Best day ever!" Yeah! Some people started to sound scared. Not everyone noticed the employees looking frazzled. I can promise you one thing. I noticed. We started going up the incline again. This was the slowest part of the ride, at around 10 miles per hour and slowing down a little as it reached its peak. This gave us opportunities to take a breath or try to talk. Although it was only for a total of about 20 seconds. Are we stuck?" I said nervously to Charlie. "I'm sure we are fine, there's just a malfunction with the electrical system not activating the brakes or something. There's always a manual shut-off." He was cut off, and we went down the steep hill. We passed by yet again, this time with more people looking worried and someone standing close to where the coaster would go by. He tried to yell at us as we went by, but we couldn't really understand him. Maybe something about them working on getting us off. This time, as we zoomed by, everyone was scared and starting to panic. I guess it didn't sink in for some people what was happening until right now. We went around a fifth time, and everything remained the same. On the sixth time, we were at the peak and saw a fire truck coming into the parking lot. From the top of the incline, we had a perfect view of the parking lot, along with the side of a highway a little further out. It took 2 more loops around the track by the time the fire department got to us. Not just them, but police officers and ambulances. It started to scare me. Why did they get ambulances? Is it just protocol, or is there more to this? Someone came in a few minutes later with a big white board that they used to write messages to us. The ride was too loud when passing by them to hear anything, so this was their only way to talk to us. It must have been the 12th or 13th time around when the whiteboard read, "Trying to free you at peak." I knew they couldn't write a novel for us because you can only read so much while going by so fast, but come on, people, what is that supposed to mean? I think they just wanted to tell us they were working on a way to get us down, but that didn't matter. We had been on this ride for nearly 30 minutes, and we felt sick, and our bodies hurt like crazy. A couple loops after that, we saw a fire truck trying to get underneath where the top of the ascent was. Luckily, there was a large space where the truck could pull right beside it. Unfortunately, at its peak, it's about 200 feet in the air. It also didn't have any emergency exits at the top, like most coasters do. You'd think that would be a requirement, but what do I know? We saw the fire truck start to expand the ladder that comes out the top, but it wasn't even close. We waited for the firefighters to try and figure out a solution to save us, as the audience below us was watching us like we were some kind of show. It was close to 45 minutes when the first death occurred. Then one more soon after. There was a skinnier guy in a car behind me. I heard him talking about trying to slip out of the seat restraint, which secured him to his seat. The other guy he was with told him it was a bad idea. So did I. The next time we went up the ascent, he began violently wiggling and thrashing back and forth, to the point where people thought he was going to throw off the ride. He managed to wiggle about halfway out, right at the top. But, well, it didn't end very well. His leg got caught on a part of the track and yanked the rest of his body out of the bar restraint. It sent his body crashing down towards the earth. However, I think he was dead soon after he was ripped out of his seat. I didn't see too much of it, but the guy who was beside him let out an insane screech. Hearing that kind of agony as you are feeling the harsh effects of gravity hitting on your chest while going down a steep hill was truly mortifying. The screech out of nowhere stopped, and more people screamed. The man beside him had a heart attack. I could hear the symphony of moans and crying coming from the crowd watching us. I couldn't hear them before because of how loud the ride was, but they were terrified of what they saw. Police tried to escort them out of the park, but it didn't stop people from parking on the side of the road to watch and record on their phones. It made me feel disgusted. At around an hour on the ride, everyone stopped screaming or trying to talk to each other. It seemed like everyone accepted their fate. My nails were deeply embedded into Charlie's wrist. I couldn't scream anymore due to my throat feeling raw from the yelling. Even if I wanted to, I probably couldn't due to my voice giving out. I saw that I drew a little blood on Charlie, but he was too out of it to notice. He, along with a few other people, were incredibly sick. He threw up probably 5 times by this point and looked cross-eyed. Around that time, the electricity in the whole park shut down. All the lights, everything. I think they were hoping a hard reboot of the whole park would stop the ride. The coaster didn't just rely on gravity but also on a lot of help from motors and other electronic elements. It all turned off when we were on the straightaway. Of course, it still didn't stop. I could hear someone yelling with frustration, not understanding how it could still be moving if it didn't have an electrical source. After 2 hours, they let some family members come into the loading area, which was a terrible idea. We were doing our best to keep cool and stay calm. Our families watching us, zooming by them every 2 minutes, and absolutely screaming at us, made it so much worse. My mom was my first family member to show up. Don't get me wrong. I love my mom, but she is very stubborn and wanted something done even though they had already tried everything. Of course, it was just because she wanted me safe, but it was stressing me out. The firefighters put down a safety net underneath the ascent. It was still quite a jump if we could even get out successfully to land on it. And we might be okay, but we were all a little scarred from what happened before. It seemed like they put it out just in case someone tried to get out again. It didn't seem like it was the plan to have us all just jump out of that moving death machine. They weren't desperate enough at that point. We saw a large group of people passionately arguing and yelling at each other. From what I could tell, it was made up of family members, firefighters, and some employees of the park. I'm sure with lots of varying opinions. The ride was on hour 3. When the coaster entered the loading area once again, I saw a woman run over to the control panel. A couple people ran over to her and told her to stop and not press the button. She was screaming her head off and wailing. It had been hard to understand people in the past while going by them, but this was as clear as day. As we passed by, I could tell she was starting to break free from the grip of people holding her back. I wasn't too worried. Whatever button she was wanting to press, I'm sure it wouldn't work since none of the other ones worked so far. We were about 5 seconds away from going down the descent when we heard a click come from all our seats. The woman hit the button that unlocked all our overhead seat belts. Of course, the seatbelt button worked, but not the button to stop the ride. A few people reacted fast enough to either jump out or snap it back over themselves before the ride went down. Others weren't so lucky. 3 people managed to jump out but didn't survive the fall. Despite there now being a giant net to catch anyone who was dumb enough to try and get out that high, one person hit a support beam on the way down, and the other 2 landed wrong when they hit the net. Their bodies folded in an unnatural manner as they hit. All 3 died instantly. I would say around half of us that were left managed to get the seatbelt secured before going down the hill. Everyone else had to hold on for dear life. And unfortunately, I was one of them. I felt my stomach start to drop as I reached up to grab the only thing that would keep me from becoming a part of the pavement below. The restraint wasn't completely useless at this point. I just had a good 12 inches in between my chest and the restraint. As I dug my fingers into the plastic, I hoped I would be fine. Then the ride dropped. I felt my butt lift off the seat I had become so familiar with. I tried to wrap my ankles around the floor of the coaster to keep the rest of my body from flying out. Charlie luckily got the restraint down, so he was trying to get his leg over mine and hold me down with his arm. After the longest 5 seconds of my life, I managed to pull it back down over my chest. I wasn't sure who else got theirs down, but I assumed, from how scared a few of them sounded, it wasn't good. All I could think about and look at was the big loop coming up. As we got closer, I could hear swearing from multiple passengers, including someone in front of me. She was violently pulling at the restraint, but it just wasn't budging. I was hoping and praying that the centrifugal force would keep her in her seat. As we went around the big loop, I closed my eyes. I knew I didn't want to see what was about to happen. I heard multiple people screaming and making horrendous cracking sounds. I don't have an exact number, but I would say only 7 people were left. I could see the 2 people in the very front row and Charlie beside me. I recall only hearing 3 other voices behind me at this point. At hour 5, 3 more people died while on the ride. 2 of them from a heart attack or something. The 3rd person, well, he watched the person beside him suddenly die while going around one of the bends. He yelled out in anger, and well, I'd actually rather not go into detail. But he died soon after. I saw the whole thing. They were the 2 people left in front of me and Charlie. At hour 6, we saw a group of people bringing in what looked like another large net. Except that it was in the loading area. The next time we looped around, they wrote something new on the big white board. We are going to try and stop it manually. I had no clue what this meant, but by the look of the net, I was terrified. The next pass, there were people on both sides of the loading area. On one side, the net was wrapped around a large pole that had been somehow fastened into the concrete slab. I saw a large, similar pole on the other side, but the net wasn't yet attached. As we zoomed by, I could hear people trying to rush and hurry behind us. We went around one of the turns, and I cranked my neck, looking to see what plan they had in mind. They were frantically trying to tie the other side of the net to the support beam that was freshly drilled into the ground. I couldn't believe how stupid these people were. How on earth did they think this was a good idea? Was this a last-ditch attempt? I was yelling at them and telling them to stop, but of course they couldn't hear me. Even if they could, they wouldn't listen. They were desperate to get at least someone out of this alive. Or maybe the owner of the park wanted all of us to die so that no one could publicly talk about the horrific things we went through. As we went past the last bend, the hundreds of people watching the spectacle cheered, clapped, and celebrated. Somehow, not seeing any of the flaws with this terrible plan. We were on the straightaway and my heart started to pound again. The few seconds before we hit the net felt like slow motion. I swore I could see everyone's face. They looked happy. I couldn't believe it. It made me upset because I knew they were all about to be very disappointed. Finally, we hit the net. Of course, it was no match for a giant metal contraption hitting it. The metal pole was ripped out of the concrete slab and smashed down right in between our car and the one behind us. As we headed for the incline, we tried to get the net that attached itself to us off of the coaster. Luckily, we were able to get it off of us, but no luck with the metal beam that was now awkwardly lodged in the coaster. As we started going down, the whole ride started to shake violently. It felt like we were going to fly off the track. We made it to the first turn. I heard a loud snap and 2 screams. The 7 coaster cars behind ours broke off, and the metal beam found its way underneath. As we turned, I watched in disbelief as the cars behind us all went flying off the tracks. At that point in the ride, it was about 50 feet off the ground. Still enough to kill them. I wasn't fast enough to close my eyes and saw the whole thing. It went off the track like it had wings and suddenly plummeted down into the earth. The screaming immediately stopped when the ride landed upside down. My imagination filled in the blanks and shuddered at the thought of the carnage below me. And then there were 2. We were hoping that somehow the ride would stop or slow down because we lost the back 7 cars. I was not sure what the logic was, but we were desperate at this point. After another hour, it was not showing any signs of slowing down. Once we made it to hour 8, we expected our fate. I was hoping that this would all be over soon and we could just be done. I don't think either one of us thought we'd get off. We just hoped, at this point, that our deaths would be quick. Over the next couple hours, we noticed a piece of metal on the car ahead of us start to wobble and loosen. I'm not sure if it was just the wear and tear of the ride going for so long or the whole net fiasco. It kept looking like it was about to come loose, and we'd duck out of the way. We were imagining the worst possible outcome, thinking it would fly off and decapitate one of us. Eventually, it did come off. But it wasn't a dramatic moment like we thought it would be. It was so much worse. Instead of coming all the way off, it only partially came off and started grinding loudly against the track. We heard an audible cringing sound from everyone watching below. The sound was horrendous. The thin strip of metal started to find its way underneath the car. Charlie was worried it would dislodge the coaster from its tracks like we saw just hours before. He told me he was going to try and grab it. I begged him not to. After a few laps of me telling him to just leave it, he made up his mind and contorted his body to try and grab the sharp metal. I couldn't see his hand as he reached down for it, but I could see his face. Somehow, that made it worse. His expression quickly changed from focused to shocked in a matter of seconds. His face was blank. I heard screaming but had no clue what was going on. He lifted up his arm and I don't think I will ever be able to get the image of what used to be his arm out of my head. When he gripped the metal, it slipped and went deep into his forearm. I tried to grab his shoulder to calm him down, but to my shock, he was calm. He was more silent at that moment than he had been the whole day. He wouldn't even look at me. He was almost mesmerized by the sight of his bloodied, disfigured arm. I felt lightheaded and had a ringing in my ears. Watching the blood start to make its way down his entire body, then to me and the floor of the coaster. It was making me feel sick watching the blood move around the car as we went around the twists and turns of the ride. Within minutes, Charlie looked like a ghost. I did my best to try and wrap his arm up with shreds of my shirt, but it was completely pointless. I don't think an old t-shirt can help when you see the bone. I tried to talk to him. I tried to make him feel as comfortable as I could, but it was no use. He was fading in and out of consciousness. We began going up the ascent, and he finally looked over at me. I couldn't begin to explain all that I saw in his eyes. I could see the pain and sadness, but also the relief. He knew he was going to die. But I don't think he cared. He gave me a weak nod of the head and looked ahead when we went down the hill. I tried to keep a close eye on him this lap, but it was honestly hard to look at him. I heard him take a deep breath right before the loop. When we finished the loop, I looked over at him, and, well, he was gone. I was now left alone in the death trap. I never imagined it could have gotten any worse. But having a dead body sitting next to you on a roller coaster is not something I would recommend. I was sitting in shock next to my dead friend for a couple hours. I was frozen in fear, not wanting to even think of a way out. After gaining some courage, I contemplated my next move. I came back into reality and realized the coaster was going just slightly slower. It wasn't significant, but if the loops were taking just slightly longer than before, that damn piece of metal that killed Charlie must have made its way underneath and not derailed it but slowed it down. I ended up taking off my shoes in Charlie's shoes. I had a plan that was probably dumb, but if I died, at least it would be in my hands. As I went by the loading area, the coaster started to slow down just before the ascent. I threw all 4 shoes right in front of the ride. A part of a shoe caught the truck in just the right spot. The ride was still. I could feel the coaster almost pulsing, trying to move with all its might. I was sore. My shoulders were badly buried by the shoulder restraints, repeatedly hitting me over and over again. My whole lower half aching from sitting in a hard seat for hours on hours. I took a deep breath and squeezed in my gut like I never had before. I let out a horrific yell as I forced my body out of the restraint that had been holding me down for the last 12 hours. About 360 times around the track. My heart was racing as I felt the coaster start to win the battle to move again. I managed to squeeze out just seconds before it took off. I was freed and jumped. Luckily, I just barely hit the net below. I also managed to hit the net, so I didn't hurt myself too badly. Nothing is worse than what that ride already did to me. I laid on the net, looking up into the sky. In disbelief. I was still. I wasn't moving. It was almost making me feel motion sick not moving around. Like when you are reading a book in the car and you look up after an hour. Everything was blurry. I could barely hear the faint sound of people trying to get to me. But it was mostly just my ears ringing and my heart beating. After just a few minutes, I was down. They immediately rushed me to the ER, where I stayed for 3 weeks. I sustained a broken rib, a broken collarbone, severe bruising, and a concussion, just to name a few. Not to mention the mental trauma. I'm writing this as I'm feeling ready to finally tell my story. This is the first time I'm digging back into my memories and recollecting the whole experience. I've started to work through all this with a therapist, and it's made me realize I need to get it all out of my system. Don't bother trying to find anything about this story. The owners of the park have done a suspiciously good job hiding it. That's another reason I want to get my story out there. They have completely scrubbed the internet of it somehow. Although talking with a professional has helped, there are still some sounds and images that I can just never completely get out of my head. If you take one thing from my story, it's that you should trust yourself. Even if you don't believe in a higher power or gut instincts. If you have a feeling, trust it. Please. Story 2. Seven Sisters Road. I've lived in the same small, dreary Nebraska town my entire life. I'm not a hick, like most people that don't live in Nebraska assume, and we're not backward people either. We have running water, electricity, all that good stuff. Sure, sometimes we add an iron wash, but otherwise, we're exactly like everyone else. But I digress. About a 2-hour drive from my hometown, there lies Seven Sisters Road. Seven Sisters Road is one of the most popular ghost stories to be told around where I live. I remember my grandfather giving me and my sister the drunken version of the story every Saturday night. I would sit on the edge of my seat while he spouted beer-fueled nonsense about the road, fascinated by what little my 8-year-old mind could piece together, and I made it my life goal to actually get to go drive down that road one day and see if the legends were true. The Seven Sisters Road, for those that don't know, is a sketchy, unmaintained stretch of road a few miles outside of Nebraska City. Now, Nebraska is no stranger to gruesome tales. We have the Witch's Bridge, the ammunitions depot in my hometown, among others, but this has always stood out. This is by far the most blood-curdling piece of folklore this state has to offer. It starts with a man, as most of these tales do. He lived on this stretch of road with his 7 daughters, and one day, for some unknown reason, he went completely bonkers and killed every last one of them. He lured them out of the house one by one, leading each one to a separate hill, and hung them from the trees. Driving down the road can be dangerous. Cars will stall, headlights will dim, phone batteries will die without warning. Perhaps the most chilling is hearing the screams of the 7 sisters. And all of that was merely a ghost story, something I maybe believed when I was 8 or 9, but quickly passed off as a side effect of my grandpa's alcoholism. I started doing more research, but finding things on the internet about Nebraska is damn near impossible, because really, who cares about the state that gifted us with Kool-Aid? All I could find were 2 websites explaining the legend in the exact same way, and a newspaper article about a new road plan. No history, no mention on if the murders actually happened, nothing. So, I got ready to head out and keep my promise to my 8-year-old self. I was going to Seven Sisters Road. I armed myself with my car keys and my emergency backpack, picked up my best friend, and we were off. An hour and a half, 2 hours later, maybe, saw us on the outskirts of Nebraska City. We stopped in town to fuel up, grabbed some snacks, and headed back out. It was near dusk when we found the road. It's technically called Road L now, and I pulled onto the unpaved mess, my heart thrumming in my chest. A quarter of a mile down the road and nothing had happened yet. I wanted to laugh it off, but being a lover of the paranormal, and also a bit of a skeptic, I couldn't. Not this time. I needed proof that this road was going to stall my car or kill my phone, and I needed it bad. We passed the first hill, and still nothing but a rapidly beating heart and anxiety. My best friend scrolled through her phone, unfazed and bored as ever. Honestly, we should turn back. Nothing's going to happen, she said. I shook my head and kept driving. We passed the second hill, and my car lets out a groan. Did you hear that? I asked, turning to my friend. She rolled her eyes. Okay, yes, but literally, your car always makes weird noises. That didn't prove anything, smartass. I didn't say anything for a minute until my headlights flickered. Did you fucking see that? I pointed excitedly. I did. My friend's face had gone white. What's up? You look sick. I reached down to the cup holder and handed her a bottle of water. Drink this. Dude, my phone is dead. I had half a charge, she croaked after taking a sip of the water. I laughed, giddy with delight that we were actually getting results from this trip. After visiting most of the so-called paranormal locations in this boring-ass state, we were finally getting somewhere. This is amazing, I shouted. We were somewhere past the 4th or 5th hill, the sun finally having gone down. The pink streaks in the fluffy clouds completely gone, leaving darkness in their wake. It wasn't until we were passing the 6th hill that the screaming started, and my blood ran cold. Now, the legend always recounted that it was the sisters that could be heard screaming, never the father, but the screams I heard were definitely male. I could hear distinctly female screams too, but they were always answered by a deep, masculine voice that turned my blood to ice. We need to go, my friend stated plainly, her voice deadpan, her white moon of a face illuminated by my dashboard lights. I nodded. The male voice sounded so much closer than the screaming of the sisters. They sounded as though they were coming from inside the car itself, and I willed myself not to turn around and check in the back seat, scared of what I might find. I swallowed painfully, my car rocking and rumbling its way down the road until we passed the 7th hill, and everything stopped. The road was still unpaved, but maintained, my headlights weren't flickering, but most importantly, there was dead silence. There wasn't a single scream to be heard. My friend and I let out a simultaneous sigh of relief. There was no way in hell I was going to go through that road to get back to Nebraska City. Nobody could pay me enough to do so. I don't know what made it worse though, the fact that the screaming male sounded close enough to be in my back seat, or the fact that we could have been stranded and nobody would have known. But I do know one thing, Seven Sisters Road is definitely not some crackpot drunk's fictitious ramblings. If you decide to make the trek out there, please be careful. Carry a map instead of a GPS, and always bring at least one more person. You never know what could happen. Story 3. There is a long road in Manitoba, Canada. At what point do you question a long road? How many kilometers do you drive without a single change before you think something is off? How many miles upon miles of pavement before you start to consider that you have stumbled upon something strange? I say this because of what happened to me during my road trip through Manitoba. I grew up in the city, and when I moved away for university I decided to keep things the same, moving into the next biggest city in the country. Not because I needed to pursue my field at that school, but because of the city itself. I had always liked the bustle. I know that's probably uncommon for most people, but I always liked how there was something to do at any given moment. I could, on any night, choose 50 different places to go with friends or my girlfriend Sarah. So, when summer break finally came around and Sarah suggested that we go visit my parents, I thought it was a fine suggestion. The only problem was, Sarah could not ride in an airplane. She always chalked it up to the environmental impact, but I knew she was terrified of flying in them. We couldn't even rent an apartment on any floor above 3. Thus, the only way to travel would be to road trip across the country. I think if I knew what was going to happen, I would have forced Sarah to deal with her fear. I don't know if you know anything about the geography of Canada, but the space between Vancouver and Toronto is empty. I mean, the first leg of the journey when you are cruising through the mountains is beautiful, but for most of the trip, it is nothing but open grassland and farm fields. Nothing but a flat and empty road to drive along for days. But, I loaded up my favorite playlist and we started the long drive back to my hometown. The first leg of the journey was beautiful. We stopped at a couple popular destinations and national parks and it was fun, but I still had that itch in the back of my mind. I knew that the rest of the road trip would be mind-numbingly boring. For the first couple hours of the drive, it was fine. A flat road as far as I could see ahead, chatting with Sarah and having fun. It was when we pulled over for the night on the empty side of the road when I think it changed. It was a random gravel pull-off, completely mundane in appearance, but I think that's when it went wrong. The night was peaceful and when I woke up it was already midday. A perfect blue sky with no clouds in sight atop a flat green plain for as far as I could see. There wasn't even any wind blowing through the infinite field. It was just a silent expanse of blue and green. I didn't think anything of it though and resumed the journey, leaving Sarah asleep in the back of the car. My phone had lost signal with no towns around, so I could no longer use my GPS. I did remember that we would eventually hit a town though, and that's where I could get directions. I had been driving for 18 hours on the unending road before I encountered another pull-off. It hadn't even looked like time had passed, with the blue sky still just as perfect as it was before. It was weird, but your mind doesn't think of the impossible first. It comes up with logical excuses and reasons for situations that don't make sense. I just assumed that maybe it was brighter longer in the prairie. Sarah was a worrier, but I assured her that the light probably just lasted longer. Given how flat it was, the sun would never blocked out by anything. So we both fell asleep without issue. The next day was the same. The exact same scene of a silent blue sky on the infinite green earth. I was starting to worry about the car's dwindling gas. We had not encountered another sign of civilization in 2 days, and the small jerrycan I had stashed was also empty now. I pushed forward though. If I kept driving I would eventually find a town. That wasn't true. After driving for another 16 hours on the road, green grass, and blue sky in every direction, the car died. Sarah was certifiably freaking out now, looking at me for any sense of what to do, and I was not doing well either. I mean, it didn't make sense. Nothing had changed in 72 hours. It was an impossible situation, but we were in it. How can you experience something impossible? It's antithetical to reality. You should not be able to experience something impossible. After a short panic attack, I decided that we needed to stay calm. I looked in every direction, seeing nothing until the curves of the earth stopped my view. The blue and green of the grassland stretching as far as I could see. I told Sarah that it was going to be okay, that we could just ask the next car to come through and we could hitchhike to the next town. We hadn't seen any other cars on the road though, and we both knew that. We waited in the car. I assume it was for the rest of the day, but time wasn't really passing. It must have been longer than that. We went through our rations too fast for it to be just a day. Our packed sandwiches and drinks had run out. I flicked at the chicken between my teeth, trying to get every very last bit of meat. We were both hungry, but it looked like Sarah was doing worse than me. I was practically keeping track of the time with the rumbling of her stomach. Every time I would try and forget about our hunger and to think about the meat I had eaten previously, its snarl would bring me back to reality. It taunted me, making me even hungrier, starving for something to eat. It was in a lull when Sarah brought me out of this cycle. She screamed at me and told me that we would walk to the next town to find help no matter what. I don't know if it was out of fear or hunger that I caved and decided to leave the car. I know it wasn't love, we were both too hungry and alone to care about love. So we started walking along the edge of the road, following the gravel in the direction of the non-existent town. When I turned around to check our progress, I didn't see the car anymore. Behind was the same as forward. We encountered another pull-off just as our legs were giving out and decided to camp there and rest. I was so tired I was able to fall asleep on the gravel easily. I distinctly remember dreaming of oxen, stacked in emaciated piles. The only creature they could feed were the flies that swarmed their shriveled skin. The dream was short-lived though, as I was suddenly woken up to the sensation of not being able to breathe as Sarah's hands clenched around my throat. I quickly kicked her in the gut and pushed her off of me before getting to my feet. When I looked in her direction, I knew it was my girlfriend. However, she looked so different that I could hardly think of her as that. It wasn't like she was crouched in the dark, the midday light perfectly shone on her and showed what she had become. She looked like a starved animal. A weak animal. An animal that could sustain me until I found the town and saved us. We fought. She bit me, I scratched her, and we wrestled in the gravel for a while. I was stronger though and was able to keep her down. I ate the spoils of my contest, and the meat fed me. So, I kept walking along the road with my newly found energy. I needed to find the next town so I could save us. I don't really know how far I walked until I passed out on another gravel pullover. I looked up into the infinite blue sky above me and realized that there was no sun, just a perfectly blue day. That's when I was finally shook awake by a passing truck driver. He had seen me on the side of the road covered in blood. He had assumed I was left out here to die, so he had stopped to help me. I was barely coherent, so he took me into the next town where I was treated in the hospital for dehydration and exhaustion. It was around a week before the hospital released me. I tried to get the police to follow me, to take me to where I had left my car or help Sarah. I screamed at them that we had to save her, that she was waiting for me. We couldn't find either and they shipped me off to my parents' house in Toronto. They didn't even arrest me, thinking that I had been hallucinating due to the starvation. They even tested the blood that covered me but had concluded it was unidentifiable. I never found my car, but that didn't concern me. Sarah never turned up again. The police's leading theory was that she was kidnapped on our road trip and I couldn't deal with the stress. But I know they are wrong, the bite marks I suffered still line my body. But most of all, I can still feel her. I still hunger for her, I need to find her and help her. I think about her body. I think about how much I loved her and how much she helped me and the pit in my stomach. However, she didn't do enough. She didn't satisfy the primal yearning I feel. My stomach still aches, snarling to be filled, begging deep in the core of my body. Story 4. If you take the back roads, don't stop. My girlfriend and I like to drive on the weekends. Something we both had in common was that when we were younger, our families would take us on road trips on the weekends to break away from the weekly monotony. This is something that we kept going well into adulthood, and after a long week of soul-crushing 9 to 5, we would pack up and go on adventures together. After our most recent adventure, we were heading back home when a traffic accident stopped all highway traffic dead for hours. At this rate, we aren't going to get back home in time. My girlfriend said while browsing Reddit on her phone. Well, it's not like I can fly the car over the traffic. We knew this adventure was risky. We didn't have room for error when driving out of state. A delay like this would run us the risk of missing work and eating into our paychecks, and when you're a young American couple with debt and living paycheck to paycheck, that's not really an option. I'm gonna try to see what the holdup is, try to find us another route. I got out of my car and walked down the road to see how bad the situation was and maybe get an update on how long we would be stuck here for. I didn't get the chance to talk to anyone. Maybe 3 minutes into my walk I could see dozens of police, fire, and rescue vehicles trying to stop a fire caused by a collision. Needless to say, we wouldn't be going anywhere for hours. Defeated, I walked back to my car. Well, it looks like we're fucked, I said to my girlfriend while I closed the car door. Not necessarily. I found a road that will take us around the highway crash. That was odd. Then again, Google Maps never gives you the fastest route to a place. Why didn't we see that before? I asked as my girlfriend showed me her phone screen. There was a back road that Google had not even recommended. It would have us getting back on track in about an hour, much faster than waiting around for emergency services to clear the road for traffic to flow. Without much hesitation I said fuck it and passed a few cars to do an illegal U-turn. Thankfully cops were too busy to notice me driving away in the opposite direction. Night had caught up to us while on the road, and the closer we got to the back roads we would see less signs of civilization. When we finally got to the road it was in pretty bad conditions. Potholes and unkept woods would make our drive that much slower. We had not seen post lights, other cars, or houses for miles. Driving on that road had me extremely nervous, although I tried not to show it for my girlfriend's sake. This would not be the road anyone would like to be stuck in the middle of the night. Just like I had somehow brought that thought into the universe, we saw a stalled car in the road. The road wasn't wide for two vehicles to ride alongside each other without one driving into the woods, and I was not looking to mess up our only way out of this creepy place. I parked the car 10 feet behind the vehicle in front of us. You know this is how every horror movie starts, right? My girlfriend said while very clearly terrified. I know, but there's not many options here. I reached into the glove box and grabbed my Glock. I've never actually shot the thing aside from the range, but maybe it would help me feel better about walking out of my perfectly fine car. It didn't. I slowly walked towards the car with my phone's flashlight leading the way and my gun in the other hand. The car lights were on and I was close enough to hear it was on. Hey, do you need some help? I asked firmly, trying to not let my voice tremble. No reply came from the car. As I got next to it, I could see no one was in it. It didn't make sense for someone to just leave their car running in the middle of the road, so I immediately raised my gun and looked around. I've heard of assholes doing this sort of thing to rob anyone that stopped to help. My heart skipped a beat as I looked in the back of the car and realized there was an empty baby seat. It took me a few moments to snap out of the shock and confusion, but I sat on the driver's seat and moved the car out of the road. As soon as I stepped out, I realized that aside from my breathing, the night was as quiet as the dead. An overwhelming sense of dread showered over me, and I nearly had a heart attack when I heard a voice scream out. "Help me," someone cried out from somewhere in the woods. Something was not right with that voice. It didn't sound like a voice that could ever come from a human. "Please help me. It took my baby." I stayed just as quiet as the first time it spoke. Whatever was calling for help was a few feet in front of me in the woods. I tried to ignore it. Every fiber in my being wanted to sprint back to my car and drive away to safety, but a morbidly curious part of me forced me to point my phone's flashlight in the direction the voice was coming from. In the tree line, I could make out the humanoid shape of something. No human had such features, but I could tell it was holding onto something human, the small fat leg of a baby he was still munching on like a chicken leg. I stopped breathing for a few moments when it shot me a sickening smile. His grotesque crooked fangs were stained with crimson. I completely freaked out. I dropped my phone and immediately unloaded my gun straight at the fucker, only stopping when pulling the trigger did nothing. I picked up my phone from the ground and started to carefully walk back to my car. "You missed me," something said in a mocking tone too fucking close to me in the darkness. I sprinted as fast as I possibly could back to my car and floored it as soon as I locked my door. I sped so fast out of that road I almost crashed multiple times even when I was miles away from that place. I didn't even register my girlfriend wasn't in the passenger seat anymore.